I don't want his words just to be alive in someone's mouth. I want them to be alive in their life.
Welcome to 11Alive Uninterrupted, a special series bringing you in-depth conversations with influential thought leaders in Atlanta. I'm your host, Neima Abdulahi. We are sitting down today with Dr. Bernice King, a global thought leader and CEO of the King Center. She uses her influential leadership to forge conversations about civil rights, social change, and activism. Dr. Bernice King, thank you so much for joining us today.
Glad to be with you, Neima.
As the city of Atlanta and the nation begins to celebrate MLK Day, what does it look like to you in the celebration that will help continue to preserve his legacy and the dream?
I really like this time of the year because it gives everybody an opportunity to start the year off right. You know, in some ways it's a challenge for us at the King Center, coming on the heels of the holiday, trying to crank back up in the middle of planning everything. But it's great for our nation because people are thinking about what things they can adjust, you know, what things that they can add new into their life. You know, they're making, you know, certain New Year's, you know, wishes, and et cetera. And so what better way to start the year than with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and looking at the world and what ways you as an individual can make the world a better place.
And in doing that, you know, when we look at MLK Day and when we look at Black History Month, how can people take that charge and that initiative to incorporate it into their everyday lives?
Well, I think that the best way to do it is to make a commitment that this is going to be a lifelong commitment. You know, it's not just a moment, a day, a season, a month. It's not easy. I can say that because it does take a certain kind of mindset. And that's why our theme this year is cultivating a beloved community mindset, because we want to really push our world into this concept of the beloved community. What we say, where injustice ceases and love prevails.
In looking at the legacy of your father, when we look at voting rights, when we look at civil rights, when we look at desegregation, which aspects of his dream are still a work in progress?
Everything is a work in progress. You know, the thing that they were successful with is doing away with de jure, by law, segregation. I don't think we'll ever see that again. By practice, different. You know, there are many places de facto are still segregated. We're still segregated in our educational system. I mean, many of our school systems are still, quote unquote, highly concentrated Black and very few other. We still have a lot of residential segregation by choice. But also we still have things like redlining going on where people are steering people to certain neighborhoods and zip codes according to, you know, their race. So we still have to figure out how to deal with the implicit and the explicit biases that people have.
Now, as we talk about the dream, you know, that unfulfilled dream and the progress that's still left to be done, I feel like it's something that should also be highlighted. There is a quote that your father said that really stuck out to me. We choose our motto to save the soul of America. What comes to mind as you really think about that and how we can measure the condition that the soul is currently in this generation?
Well, you know, unfortunately, we've gotten to a place where the value of people has become less and less. You know, Daddy talked about in 1967, and where do we go from here, his book. We must rapidly begin the shift from a thing-oriented society to a person-centered society. And I think there's a lot of focus on stuff and things, and not a lot of value for the human being. So that's why you see a lot of taking of life. Some of it, yes, can be attributed to some of the economic conditions and people expressing out of, you know, those situations, but it's also a devaluing, you know, of life. And understanding the importance of putting people at center. That's the soul part of our nation, is how do we get to a place where humanity is front and center. You know, the needs of individuals is a priority. You know, why don't people have livable wages? Why is homelessness out of control in this nation? because we have become too materialistic. And that's the part of the soul that I think is struggling in this nation that we have to deal with.
Dr. King's impact was heavily influenced by women, not only the women in his life, but also the women of the movement. Let's really give them their flowers. Your mother played a huge impact in the civil rights movement as well. Let's talk about how she helped carry that torch and how she really got to work after he passed away in preserving that legacy.
Yeah, and what people should know is that it started before she met Martin Luther King Jr. We are launching a digital exhibit called, it's a timeline, and it's Gia Coretta, because it's a tribute to her legacy in becoming the architect of the King legacy. And it starts with her early life and see how she developed as a person to even get to a place where she was able to carry forward like she did 2.5 months after an assassination. It was all a part of her purpose in life that was unfolding. And I tell people all the time, when he was assassinated, he was one of the most hated persons in America. But then now today, he's one of the most loved persons in the world. Now most people say that's because he's dead, they don't have to deal with him and all that kind of stuff. I agree with that, but I also say the only reason that Dr. King is the icon that he is today is because of Coretta Scott King. Were there other people? Yes, family members, you know, friends, other members, other individuals that work with him in the movement. But the consistent factor through it all was the systematic and diligent work of Coretta Scott King. She was very strategic in ensuring that there was kind of an institutionalization of the legacy beyond establishing the King Center, but even building up interest in this movement to the point that people now refer to it when they are, you know, launching movements and dealing with issues around the world. Everybody looks to it. And that's her work. When she wrote her book, My Life with Martin Luther King Jr., her tour didn't start in the United States of America, because that's where the movement happened. The tour started around the world. So she was thinking global, because when he got the Nobel Peace Prize, it was like, okay, let's start out there and come in. And that's why his legacy, even in the world community, is still very intriguing to people, more so than here in the United States of America.
What comes to mind is how you're always working hard to preserve the authenticity of his dream and what he stood for. As we, you know, look at his writing and his speeches and how it has changed the nation and the entire world, let's really talk about how sometimes his quotes and his speeches have at some moments been misused. So what message do you have for people in preserving the authenticity of his words and what they actually meant?
Well, I think, number one, there's always going to be misinterpretation. There's always going to be misappropriation. I mean, as a Christian, it happens with the Bible. So I don't expect anything different with my father. I think what's important is those of us like myself, the King Center, and those who, you know, have truly studied my father's legacy, that we continue to keep the authentic King out there, that we don't miss a beat. That's why, you know, when certain things are said across social media, there's a response. Can't respond to everything, and you certainly can't go back and forth in an argument. But there are enough people out there.
Because you don't want to give that hate a platform.
Right, exactly. But there are enough people out there that's still on the fence or don't understand, so that's why you can't just be silent. So I think it's important to do that, but also what's more important is that we have to begin to embody Dr. King. You know, we talk a lot here in Atlanta about the beloved community, but I'm not sure we are practicing or living the beloved community. So it's more than just the words of Dr. King. It's how do we make those words become flesh, you know, in our city and across our nation. You know, so many people can talk about my father, but I always say, but did you do it in the spirit of Dr. King? Because if it's not done in the spirit of Dr. King, then, you know, you're just, you know, spouting out words as far as I'm concerned. I don't want his words just to be alive in someone's mouth. I want them to be alive in their life.
What can we do in that beloved community to make sure that what he stood for and the dream is never watered down?
We need to really study nonviolence. So I always encourage people to go to kingcenter.org, because in order to really carry out his work, you have to understand what that work was and how he carried out, more importantly. It wasn't just the fact that he voiced, you know, his disagreement with or issue with injustices. It's the fact that he used a certain approach in how to address those injustices. And that's what we're lacking today. We're lacking the right strategy and approach and spirit and heart to dismantle a lot of these injustices and inequities.
Words matter. And how we use words also matter. And I know sometimes, like you've spoken out on Twitter, where someone on Twitter may say, or a company or a corporation may say, he died for, or he sacrificed his life. And you're always reminding them, no, if we pay attention to words, we can acknowledge history and what happened, that he was murdered, that he was assassinated. How important is it to make sure that we don't water down what happened to him, and that we push forward with the dream that still lives on to this day?
Right. You know, I think the truth is always important in a movement. You know, if we do water it down, then we'll get the cheapest version of Dr. King, which will not benefit any of us. And so, again, I think it's important that those of us who know the authentic, the radical, the whole, as we say, the comprehensive King, that we keep that before the public. You know, there was a season where the only thing people knew was I have a dream. I don't know if you remember that. It was like everything is I have a dream. And no, there was more to Dr. King than I have a dream. Let's look at what he said about war and militarism. Let's look at what he said about materialism and poverty. You know, let's look at what he said about racism. Let's look at what he said about political ideology that's very dangerous. And it's there. So the beauty is we have all of his words, some on display. We have an institution that my mother created as the official living memorial to the life, work, and legacy. And so we're just going to continue to do the work that we're doing, keeping that authentic, because the authentic left us a blueprint.
As we look at the beloved community, how far it has come, what can this young generation do to contribute to it in helping it go forward?
Learn and extract from those that have come before us. It's very important. You know, none of us is self-made, as much as some people want to believe. You know, I did it. You know, I did it my way. Yes, I get that. But at the end of the day, we're all standing on the shoulders of giants that have come before us, and there are things we can extract and learn from them.
What can the history books do to honor Alberta King, Coretta Scott King, and, you know, the women of the movement from Diane Nash, Ella Baker, Rosa Parks, Fannie Lou Hamer, Septima Clark, Bernice Robinson.
The list can go on and on.
Oftentimes it's the women, you know, who aren't really given their flowers and how much change they helped create. Like, what can society do in honoring the women of the movement?
Well, I think it's what you just did. It starts with recognizing it, acknowledging it, and creating a space for it. We're creating a space at the King Center soon that's going to be called Women's Soul of the Nation, so that when people come, they will see what these incredible women have done. We as women in particular have to insist on this and do it in our own circles of influence. But there are times when we have to find ways to coordinate and collaborate together to make a larger impact and impression. And I think we're at that season. We're in a window now, you know, where people are paying attention. And young people in particular. And many of them want to know more about who has contributed, you know, to our world and to our nation, and how. And so what can we do again collectively that has a larger impact for this next generation? Because I think it will give them, the confidence and the guidance that they need, because I think that's very important that we missed. Very intelligent generation, but still needs some guidance as to how these women and men, were able to tackle so many difficult, challenging, painful, oppressive, exploitative, and damaging situations.
And still remained hopeful.
Hopeful.
Yeah, no, this young generation has a lot of heart. They may not have all the tools, but they have the drive to get there.
They do have the drive, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. As we look at those who put their minds and body and soul on the line for change to happen, let's talk about the Black Mecca. And how it really laid the groundwork for the rest of the nation to catch on. What influence can Atlanta continue to have, not only as a Black Mecca that has been in a place and in a certain time period, but the epicenter and continue being the epicenter for change? My
suggestion is, if we're going to keep the Mecca and protect it from being destroyed, then we're going to have to do some serious, not just collaborating, but coordinating together. Collaboration, coordination over competition. Yes. And kind of having that streamline. As we wrap up this conversation, I want to ask you, as a thought leader, as a global thought leader, as CEO of the King Center, what keeps you going when times get hard? Because your job ain't easy. No, it's not. But you know what? I had the benefit of watching my mother go through so many seasons. Okay. Of difficulty and challenges. I know about things the public didn't know. Right. But I saw her hold her head up. I saw her pray. I saw her let love lead her in seasons where she could have, been filled with vengefulness and payback, because things have happened in this city that were very hurtful to her as a person. But she didn't let that stop her. She kept going. I look at our ancestors, and this is across the board culturally. We can look at all of our ancestors and see what they came through to get us here today, and know that we are made of them. We come from them. And if they could overcome, that's why we sing, we shall overcome, because they overcame. So we too can overcome because we come from them. And then finally, the thing that my mother used to always say to me, she said, baby, the darkest hour is always before the dawn. Wow. And what she was reminding me is, it's dark, but dawn is coming. Now, you don't sit back and wait for it. We got to kind of usher it and push it and keep doing the work. But if you don't stop and you keep moving, it's going some kind of breakthrough that's good is going to happen. It may not be all that you want it to be. What they did in Montgomery wasn't everything. There was no Civil Rights Act that came from that. There was no Voting Rights Act that came from that. But it was a big start, and it boosted people's morale to a place that they were willing to make an even greater sacrifice, to get us to those other things where we would have the Civil Rights Act, Voting Rights Act, and Fair Housing Act. So that's what gives me hope. I mean, it gets bad. Sometimes I'm like scratching my head, like, how are we going to get out of this? I said, I don't know how. Right. But we as a humanity have gotten out of a lot of stuff. We always figured out a way. Doesn't mean that we're not going to lose people in the process. That's inevitable, invariable. As you get older, you begin to accept there's certain things in life you can't do anything about. That's why the serenity prayer helps. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, and give me the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. There's some things we can't change. Don't waste your energy there, because that's where you get exacerbated. But God give me the energy and the strength and the connections too, so that we can work together to change those things that we have the power to change. That is so powerful. I'm hoping that someone who's watching this right now can be just as inspired as I am, just hearing you talk about the things that she told you, the things that, has been passed down to you. Thank you so much for the time that you have created for this conversation as we deep dive into the impact, what MLK Day means, but nationally, what
continuing to fulfill that dream means for each one of us. So we appreciate your time as we shine a light on Dr. King's legacy and the efforts that will continue from this day on. And to our viewers, thank you for joining us right here on 11 Alive Uninterrupted.